All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Story Making Show. I'm your host, Jim Woods, and I'm thrilled to be with ghostwriter and author Kent Sanders today. Kent, thank you so much for being with me.
Jim, thanks. I appreciate the chance to be on the show. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. We have had a lot of conversation over the years, so I'm sure this one will be no exception in the sense that it will uh, go a lot of directions we probably don't anticipate, which is a good thing.
That's part of it. That's part of the joys of writing and creating, right?
It
You
is. It is.
think you're going to do one thing and then it changes on you, right?
Yeah, that's not a bad thing.
Let's dive into ghostwriting first. You are now a professional ghostwriter.
I am. That
And
sounds so weird.
it is, right? Because I've known you for so long as college professor Kent.
I know. Or Prof. Kent, as my Prof. Sanders, as my students have called me.
Right. So how long have you been a professor? How many years?
So I started in 2004, actually. So way back in the dark ages, before there was electricity and iron tools.
Pre-Twitter, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I remember, in fact, this student. Gosh, this must have been. I don't know when Twitter came out, but I remember this student talking about, hey, this new thing called Twitter, and you do these things called tweets, and I thought that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. Of course, little did I know. I was like, why would anybody want to tweet? That sounds like something a 4-year-old would do. Little did I know that it would become a thing.
Right. Right.
So you just
Sometimes
never
we
know.
don't know. Sometimes we have no idea.
You don't.
But now
And it turns out to be it's cool. It's an amazing tool. So
that's right. Now you're a professional ghostwriter. I'll address the monkey in the room here. What is ghostwriting?
So ghostwriting is basically, as I do it, it is being a voice for someone else's content, their story, or their ideas. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what ghostwriting is because it's mysterious by definition. By definition, a ghostwriter is somebody who is in the background. They're kind of hidden. They're somewhere lurking in the shadows, not in an evil, weird way, but in a good way. So what I do as a ghostwriter is I take somebody's core idea or their content or their story, whatever the case might be, and we have a lot of conversations to work out, here's what the outline of a book would be. Here's how we're going to frame this. Here's how to position this book to help you in your business or your life, whatever your goals are. And I'm there to basically take your story and content, and then I shape that and I write it, and we kind of sculpt it. It's basically like me and the client, we walk up to this big slab of marble, and they sort of, I kind of help them envision what they want this thing to be, and then I just start chiseling away. And after a few months, we have a polished book that goes out into the world. So it's pretty magical.
I love your description. It's so artistic. I'm thinking of, David, the statue.
Yep.
That's awesome. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And from the way you're describing it, it's much more of a mutual collaboration.
It is.
Versus a, hey, go write me a book kind of thing.
Well, it can work that way. In fact, I did have a client last year who we got on the phone, and I know this is going to sound extreme and it's going to sound like I'm exaggerating, but this is actually how it happened. I was talking with a prospective client, and we had this conversation. In about a 30-second, maybe 60 seconds max clip of this conversation, they said, I have this idea for a book. Would you be interested in writing it? They gave me a very, very broad stroke of, I want the book to be about this topic. Here are a couple of things I want to emphasize. Can you do this? And I said, sure. So I went off, and without much involvement from them, I wrote the whole book. Now, excuse me, part of the process for me was because this client did not really have any not much previous content for that topic. That's when I go into detective mode, which I oftentimes do as a ghostwriter. And this is where the professor part of me kind of kicks in, like the researcher. So I go and I basically dig up everything I can on the internet, podcasts that they have been on, articles they've written, previous books maybe they have written. And I try to think like that person thinks. And I try to kind of get in their head. And sometimes it does work like that. The client you don't have a lot of calls with the person. I did have a few, actually ended up being that way, but for the most part, this was kind of me saying what this person would say if they had the time and the ability to write this book. And then, of course, they have input. In fact, I just talked with them a few days ago, and they said, "Hey, I want to make some adjustments in this." Da 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 da. And so it's very much a collaborative thing. It's not usually a thing where somebody says, "Can you write a book?" I go off and write a book and send it to a publisher, and we're done. It does. That's really not usually the way that it works.
I appreciate your explanation there in that context, Ken. I've done a little ghostwriting, and I find it kind of like marketing in that there are many different approaches. And it's like, it's almost like a spectrum. Like what I might say is good ethical marketing, someone else might be like, no, 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 that's too pushy, too aggressive, too whatever. With ghostwriting, what do you say to someone who's like, "Ooh, that sounds unethical. Like this person didn't write the book, but their name is on the cover." What do you say to someone that like would give you some pushback on it and be like, "Is that legal? Is that ethical?"
Right. Well, that is a really good question. I'm glad you brought that up because it's something I've thought about a lot. And honestly, it is, just to be really honest with you, it's something that I had to think through myself before I get into this field. Previously, I kind of had a little bit of a weird feeling about it because I was exactly the same way that you've mentioned, which is, okay, somebody's name is on this book, but they didn't actually write the book. But there's a couple things I would say to that. Number one is that culturally, we put books for some reason, we put books in a different category than we do other types of entertainment or other types of content. For example, I don't have any CDs here in my office because nobody listens to CDs anymore. But let's say if I had a Taylor Swift album that was a CD, I do actually have.
He has CDs.
Actually, now that you mention it, okay.
He has CDs.
So let's take this is a perfect example. I'm so glad you asked us, and this is so fortuitous. Okay, so my wife was at a record shop a while back because we love records in our house, and she bought me this album. It's the Beatles Rarities.
You can hold in the middle. Oh, nice. Yeah.
Okay, so this is kind of rare tracks from the Beatles.
Okay.
Now the Beatles are unique in that they wrote their own songs, they played the instruments, they sang. So it truly was the Beatles on there. However, the person's name that you don't see on any Beatles album is George Martin, who was their producer. It is widely established in music history that George Martin was a critical part of the Beatles, some at times even being called the fifth Beatle.
Yes, Beatle. Yep.
Exactly. So that's kind of how I envision ghostwriting is I'm sort of like that fifth Beatle, even though my name is not usually on your book. Although it can be, you can negotiate for that if you want to. But even though my name isn't on there, I do have influence and impact on the book. So we put books in a different category in the sense of we assume that whenever the author's name is on a book, that they wrote every word as you read it in that book. But we don't treat other kinds of art that way. So like if I have a Taylor Swift album, Taylor Swift didn't play all the instruments well, she probably did write all the songs. Let's maybe take another artist. I'm just pulling one out of my hat. I was listening to, what was I? I shouldn't admit this publicly, but I have a workout playlist. One of the songs on there is by Ariana Grande.
Okay.
Now, I'm a 47-year-old guy, so I probably shouldn't admit to listening to that. But anyway, she has a couple songs I like. Anyway, if you get one of her albums, she probably did not write all the songs, play all the instruments. I'm sure she didn't mix the music or master it or produce it. A lot of other people did that, but her name is actually on the album. But we don't question that. We don't expect that the artist's name who's on an album did everything in it. Really, it shouldn't be that way for books either. The person's name, in many cases, really represents more of a brand than it does an author who wrote every single word as it exists in that book. And there's, with very, very few exceptions, there's not very many books that exist where when you pick up that final product, the author wrote every word as you see it in the book. There's always an editor involved. Many times there's a developmental editor. Sometimes there's multiple editors.
Yep.
So a book is always a collaborative effort, even if only one person's name is on the front of it.
That's fantastic, Ken. And you also made me think of, as far as musicians go, I remember there was a J Lo song with literally like 20 people had a
Hmm.
writing credit to it.
Mhm.
And I'm not over exaggerating. I remember I looked at it and I almost fell over. It was like 20 people. And I was just, it blew my mind. I was like, often it's much more collaboration behind the scenes
There is.
than we, are privy to, frankly.
Yeah,
So,
and I would throw out the idea also. Now it sounds like I'm playing with language a little bit, and maybe I am,
mhm,
but I want to challenge the idea of what it means to be an author of a book.
mm,
Now, some of this might be semantics, and I understand that, but really, what does it mean to be the author of a book? Again, does it mean that you wrote every single word in that book, like it's printed on the page or and it's on Kindle or whatever? Well, no, it usually doesn't. It means that you are the source. You're the source of the ideas. In other words, you're the authority, which is where the word author comes from. The author is the source of the content or the ideas of or the author a T of
mhm,
the book. And I'm just a mouthpiece. I'm just a delivery vehicle to take those ideas and deliver them to the world. Sometimes that means I'm injecting more of my own research and ideas in there. Sometimes it means basically I'm taking transcripts and I'm just kind of I'm taking much more content that came directly from them and I'm massaging it, I'm redoing it, I'm reworking it. But it
yeah,
can work a variety of ways. But it's still the author's book. It's still their content and ideas.
right.
I've just expanded on it or rewritten it or massaged it in some way.
That's really good. And when you mentioned transcripts, I was thinking that's really repurposing,
It
frankly,
is.
especially
It
some
is.
people aren't comfortable writing. They're not comfortable typing or
Yep.
writing, on a page, but they're great at speaking or they're great, with audio. And
Yep.
some people, I mean, in some cases, there are even physical disabilities, or maybe,
Yep.
you know, there are a million different. I guess it's too easy to just paint one thing like ghostwriting with a broad stroke and be like, yeah. And I've been there with you. I've kind of went back and forth on it. I think there's many. I think it's a scope. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
it's one thing to act like you're the authority and have a bunch of books, but you have 20 books out there, but you haven't like contributed
Yeah.
much to any. And that I would question that authority, right? But if you're, if it's more of a joint process behind the scenes, that's completely different. So.
Yeah. I think every book is made better by collaboration. I mean, there's virtually nothing that is not made better by collaboration between two good individuals. Whether that's collaborating with your beta readers, whether it's collaborating with a co-author or an editor or whatever it is, or a publisher, everything is made better whenever you bring in good people to help you improve it. Or Walt Disney would call that plussing. They would
Mm.
take an idea and they would build on it. They would add things to it. So that is one thing that I have really learned from this ghostwriting process that I am now applying to my own writing, which is, more collaboration makes it a better product. My Artist Suitcase book that came out a few years ago, that was basically me. And I thought it was a very solid book, but my next book that's coming out in a few months, that's going to be much more collaborative. I'm going to involve a lot more people in the process of that. So yeah, collaboration is a good thing for sure.
It can be scary to collaborate.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Don't you think? Since you mentioned it, I don't want to be. I'm not a fan of teasing things out. Let's talk about your next book for a moment. Since you kind
Okay.
of mentioned it, I don't want to make people wait till the end of the show to hear more about the book. Let's talk about that now. Tell me about your
Okay.
current book that's coming out in just a few months.
So I've got 3 or 4 books coming out by the end of next year. This first one is a small book called Kickstart Your Creativity, and it is a simple 31-day challenge to help people be more creative in their everyday lives. And it is short chapters, like 3 pages. It's going to be a very short book, very, very practical, very actionable. So you can go through this in a whole month, 1 chapter a day. You can dip in and out of it whenever you want. You can pick it up and randomly select a chapter, and it's going to give you something practical, something very, very actionable that you can do that day to help you be more creative.
I like that. It's like a creative workout.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
great.
it's exactly what it is.
That's awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
we all need that constant, movement, exercise, physical exercise. This is like creative exercise. I love that. That's
Yeah.
great, man.
Yeah, this will actually be and thank you, by the way. This will be the first in a series of books called Kickstart books. I don't know what else to call them. And probably the next one will be Kickstart Your Productivity. I'll have one, I think, on networking. I'm going to have one on courage. And kind of, I've got like 10 or 12 ideas for this series. These are just short little books each of these will be a 31-day challenge on some topic for artists and creatives.
I love that they're short. I love that you're addressing problems that we all face and challenges we all have. And total disclosure, I think that even if you've written a book on these things, it's like you still have to revisit them and
you do
remind yourself, like courage. I mean, sometimes we don't even realize we're afraid. We're just so afraid or, anxious or something. So that's really cool. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Thanks. I feel like as a ghostwriter, it is important. Now, other ghostwriters would not necessarily say this, and I don't want to impose my views on anybody else, but I feel like it's important for me as a ghostwriter to continue writing my own books because I need to conquer that fear myself on a regular basis rather than just doing ghostwriting. And there are lots of ghostwriters who don't write their own stuff at all. They're perfectly content to serve clients and that's wonderful. I think you should do whatever makes you happy with that. Do whatever you like to do and what you feel like brings you joy and creativity. But myself, I don't ever want to not be writing my own stuff as well. Because the cool thing is that by working with client books, I can apply the stuff I learned from their books to my own books. And then I take the stuff I learned from my own books and I apply it to client books. So there's a lot of cross-pollination happening there that I really like that process.
I call that getting paid to learn.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. Yeah, for me, literally every ghostwriting project is like going back to school to do a deep dive in a particular topic. And so my friend Nick Pavlidis, who of course he's a ghostwriter, really my ghostwriting mentor, and he oftentimes says ghostwriting is so cool because now he gets paid to write the kind of books that he used to pay to read. So it is like learning. I mean, it's a fantastic way to learn about something.
That's so fun.
Yeah, I love it.
Are there ghostwriting projects that you turn down?
Whew, that's a good question.
If I'm throwing you under the bus, Kent, on that tricky question, I know this is a live show, but would there be things that you're just like, oh, this isn't a good fit, or would maybe ethically, or I'm just curious because I think that when you are your own business, sometimes we can get into the wrong mindset, I guess is what I'm really getting at, where it's like, say yes to everything, be a people pleaser.
Well, I think that's why, for me, that's important why having a specific niche can be good. Now, I think you can niche down too much in ghostwriting because most ghostwriters I know, they do a pretty wide array of different kinds of things. For me, because I mostly do business nonfiction for coaches, entrepreneurs, those kinds of people, just by definition, those books don't tend to have any objectionable content. There's not much profanity, like there's no sexual content in a typical business book.
Right.
So, a book that was really heavy on those kinds of things, I would probably be like, it's not really my cup of tea necessarily. Because at the end of the day, I'm putting this stuff into my head and because I see this as a thing where I'm serving people and it's my job.
Yeah.
It's also something where I'm feeding myself content. So I'm a big proponent of having a job or a career that makes you better as a person.
Yeah.
Your career should not be sucking energy away from you. It should be adding energy to your life. So I really only want to do books that I'm personally excited about and that I'm learning from. Sometimes I'm not excited about the topic initially, but I see it as a chance to get into a topic that I don't know anything about. And every topic, every subject is potentially life-changing and exciting when you really get into it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I look at it.
I like that. And it all really does come down to stories. And even if something might seem not that exciting on the surface,
Mhm.
as you dive deep, as you go into detective mode, you're going to see more of the stories emerge. And
Exactly.
that's the secret sauce, right? The stories and the conflict and the resolution and
Yeah.
all the things that keep us hooked to stories, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Stories are, I mean, that's really how we frame reality as humans. And I was reading something the other day. I don't remember what it was. You know how it is. Like you watch, all of us were reading books, we're watching YouTube stuff, we're exposing ourselves to different things. I can never remember where I read or see something, but it all kind of goes in the hopper.
That's
But I
fair.
remember seeing something the other day about, one of the important roles of art and religion in our lives, whichever, even if you're like anybody who's watching or listening to this, even if you're not a person of faith, or if you are a person of faith, no matter what kind of stripe you are or denomination or whatever faith you subscribe to, there's something about our human spirit that craves a narrative,
Mhm.
or you might call it in Joseph Campbell's language, the hero's journey.
Yep.
In his sort of lingo, we crave an overarching myth. We crave an overarching story to the universe and to our lives. So that is like so baked into us that if we can put that in our client books, if we can put it in our own books, if we can put it in the stuff we're creating, that's really what draws people in, because we are just hardwired. Our ears perk up
Yeah.
whenever somebody says, "Hey, let me tell you a story about something." That's just how we are as people.
And one thing I've noticed, Kent, more and more and more, truth in real life is even more wild than fiction.
It is.
And you watch the
It is.
news or you talk to someone or even the things you see yourself, you're like, wow, if I put that in a book or a movie, I wouldn't believe it.
Yeah, that's the way I feel about all this stuff that's coming out about UFOs. I forget what the military calls. There's a different acronym they have for those. It's unidentified something,
Mhm.
or I forget what it is. But anyway, I'm really fascinated by this. I've always loved space and military stuff,
Mhm.
even though I've never served in the military. It's like it's weirder than if you were going to have a screenwriter make a movie about UFOs and the military sightings and stuff, like the stuff that we're actually seeing in the news and that the military is being really open about. That stuff is weirder and more unpredictable than if you could sit down and make up those ideas. So, yeah, it's absolutely true. It
I
really
just,
is.
I think so many things happen, and I, I literally save lots and lots of news articles
Mhm.
because I'm like, these are totally like story seeds. I call it story seed, where it's like,
Oh, I like that.
take this idea, just give it a little more research and watch that thing just grow. Give it
Yeah.
some work, like a plant, and you'll just watch it grow, because it's usually a story comes from a great question. And I have to
I
go to
love
my
that.
all-time favorites. I have not one but two books here next to me. We haven't rehearsed this. You don't know what's coming, but
The
Godfather.
Godfather, my all-time favorite novel.
What makes that book so engaging to you?
Well, I love the characters. I think it's a fun book. It's very fast paced. It takes you into the world that most of us never visit. At least I hope that we don't visit. The organized crime. So there's an element where when we read something like The Godfather, we feel like we're doing something just a little bit naughty. There's I mean, I'm just being honest. There's something about us as humans where we like to do something that's feels a little bit forbidden. We're drawn to things that other people say you shouldn't do this. That's why when you tell your kids, don't do this, don't go don't go back into the woods by yourself. Well, the first place they're going to go when you tell them that. So there's
Yeah.
something about us psychologically that's kind of drawn to that seedy underworld kind of an idea. I think it's why the whole serial killer craze is so huge right now, because people are in horror movies. We're
Yep.
drawn to those kind of dark themes in humanity. But I also, for me personally, I am drawn to The Godfather by all those things to a degree, but the heart of why I really love that story, it's really a story about fathers and sons.
Mm,
And I have a teenage son, and of course I have a dad. So that storyline of Michael Corleone
mhm,
at the beginning of The Godfather, he never wants to become what his family has become. But
mm,
by the end of the story, he becomes way worse than his father ever was. He's
yeah.
even more ruthless and cold, and he has no heart,
Oh yeah.
really no morals or principles. So it's a fascinating story on so many levels. And also the book is great, but the movie is great too, which is really, really rare. Where you have two different forms of the same story, and both of them in their own right are considered classics, and they're really, really great.
Right. I couldn't agree more. I feel like that's a whole different show, diving deep into just The Godfather, and you could pick like which part of the story you could dive so deep. If anyone has any questions about ghostwriting, about stories, about even The Godfather, I know Kent would be thrilled to answer them.
Would be
And
happy to.
I know, I mean, these are talk about your bread and butter, stories, Godfather, and ghostwriting. Oh my goodness, this is like perfect equation for you.
I do also want to throw this out there. So a book idea that's been percolating for several years is a book on leadership lessons from The Godfather.
Mm,
Leadership and business lessons. I've got probably 17 or 20, 18 or 20 lessons. And I love one of the reasons I love The Godfather is because I do feel like that it has something valuable to teach us about taking charge of your life. That's why part of the reasons why I'm one of the reasons why I'm drawn to have my own business is because I want to have control over my schedule. I want to have control over my destiny. I want to have control over who I work with and who I don't work with. That's really, really important to me. And that's one of the themes that kind of runs through The Godfather is you don't let anybody hold you back, or don't let anybody sort of clamp you down. You know, you can do things. You can achieve things if you believe that you can.
yeah.
So hopefully you don't do it through organized crime, but you can do it through legal and moral means.
There's no good transition from this topic, so
There
there
isn't.
isn't.
So
Bianca has a question for you, Kent. How do
okay.
you find work as a ghostwriter? Can you showcase your work? So, how do you find ghostwriting work? Can you share and showcase your work?
So those are two really, really good questions. Thank you. So let me tackle the first one. How do you find clients as a ghostwriter? For me, almost all of my work comes in through referrals and through relationships. And that's the way that ghostwriting tends to work is it's very relational based. So the idea is to get clients as a ghostwriter, you have to hang around the kind of people who would want to hire a ghostwriter. Typically, and for the kind of writing that I do, that typically means business people who have money to spend on a ghostwriter. I mean, I don't know any other way to say it. There's a reason that I don't target college professors, for ghostwriting, because college professors don't usually have any money. And I would know because I just got out of that type of work. Can I say that
Or
in
they
the
might
live
just
stream?
want to do it themselves, right? I mean, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And typically teachers can write books. They're writing all kinds of stuff. So so that means I spend a lot of time networking. I spend a lot of time in Facebook communities. I'm a part of a couple of paid groups. So I think that's important. If you want to be around more kind of high level people, then you many times you have to make a personal investment in that. You've got to pay to join something. And that gets you access to a different type of person typically. So I do, and I've done that for a long time. Have invested in myself to be part of networking groups, mastermind groups, and so forth. But it's all relationship based, really. And the way that I got my first client actually was super unexpected. I did not expect it to happen this way. So I just started telling people that I was building a ghostwriting business,
Mhm.
and I would mention that frequently, not in an annoying way, but I would just tell people, "Hey, I'm building a ghostwriting business. If you know anybody who might be interested in chatting, let me know." Or people would ask what I do, and I would say, "Well, I'm a college professor, but I'm also building a ghostwriting business on the side." I would throw
Yeah.
that in there. And it's just like a little tiny hook so that people know that you're doing this type of work. And ghostwriting is such an underground thing that chances are really, really high that whenever you tell people that you're a ghostwriter, you will be the only ghostwriter that they know.
Hmm.
I mean, they typically know tons of auto mechanics, they know multiple attorneys, they know every other category of work. They know several people who do that type of thing usually. But with ghostwriting, people typically only know like one ghostwriter, unless they're kind of in the book space and publishing space. So the way it came about was I went and spoke at this tiny writing conference. There was like 7 people there, literally, at a library in Northern Illinois. A friend of mine had invited me to speak at it, and I was really, really excited to go, and I loved it. Went and spoke to this small handful of people, and I met somebody there who was a teacher who was also a writer.
Mhm.
And I mentioned to her I was building a ghostwriting business, and then a few months later, she said, "Hey, I've got a friend who's looking for a ghostwriter. Would you mind
Ooh.
talking to him?" And I did, and that's how that happened. So I think if you start telling people you're building that type of a business, if you do it consistently, and if you're also putting out your own writing, I think it's just a matter of time before that happens.
Now, please correct me, Ken, if I'm wrong, but I don't believe you had on your like website, "Hey, I'm a ghostwriter."
No, I didn't. In fact, I will say one thing that I have done an extremely poor job of in my business is I haven't even really updated my website to reflect a strong ghostwriting emphasis. Um,
Not to
which,
interrupt, Ken, but I don't want to pick on you. I'm just saying
yeah,
this was direct connection. This was
yes,
not a web SEO thing. This was
not one single
authentic
bit.
connections.
So
It's not-
this tells me the website is like way down on the list of things that are going to get you. In fact, I think it's a complete non-factor.
I I
I
totally agree.
not maybe not totally non-factor, but it's pretty much a non-factor.
I mean, yeah, or maybe we put too much weight on it.
Yeah, I mean, you should have a website,
Yeah, you
you
do,
know.
but I've chatted with several folks because I've been kind of in that website mode where it's you're not likely to get a lot of traffic in general. I'm again
Right.
I'm making a few blanket assumptions here, but smaller businesses not going to get a ton of traffic typically unless you really really focus and hone in.
Yeah.
And usually it's more like, hey, this is a portfolio. These are things I've done, but it's not an introduction to you, Kent, or to me,
Right.
Tim.
That's all that I have is I have my portfolio up there. I have a ghostwriting page
Okay.
on my website, but I haven't I should have done a complete overhaul of my website at this point. I mean, I'm doing this full time, so really I should have, but I just haven't yet. But that tells me that, and my personal experience is that clients don't come from websites typically. I think your website it should validate what you're doing in some way, but this all for me, this has all just come from relationships and people telling one another. This, in fact, I've got a contract out right now that I'm waiting for a gentleman to send back to me. He was
Mhm.
messaging me today. He said, I have a couple questions about it.
Yeah.
This came because a friend of mine introduced me to this gentleman.
Yeah.
Didn't come from my podcast or anything else. It came from just a personal relationship.
That's fantastic, Ken. And I think this, what we're really getting to here now is like the secret sauce, and that is networking
Mhm.
and relationships. And you mentioned being in some paid groups and investing in yourself. That's great, but what if you're starting out? What if you're not making much money in some of these areas? What would you tell that, like Bianca here is was asking about
Mhm.
it. Like, what would you tell her if she's like, "Well, I want to get into ghostwriting, but
Mhm.
I'm not sure about like who to network with or what I should."
Right. Right. I would say find some ways to get around business people if that's who you want to write for. There are a million ways to get around people who are your ideal clients with ghostwriting. A lot of them don't cost anything. So, for example, one thing that I started out doing is I started going to local business meetups.
Mhm.
One of them was a like a Christian business luncheon type of a deal. I went
Mhm.
to that every month for a long time. Not every month, but I went to a bunch of those. Then I met some people there, and I would have lunch with a few of those people just to connect. I
Yeah.
wasn't pitching anything. I was just connecting. And I did that in a bunch of Facebook groups, other types of things. So you have to be assertive and think about what kind of person am I trying to get around and how can I get around those people? So you don't necessarily have to shell out any money. I think you should eventually if you want to really go deeper into that world, but it doesn't cost anything to be a part of a good Facebook group where there are people hanging out there who are business people, who are leaders or entrepreneurs, and just to be helpful
Yeah.
and be engaging and to
Yep.
find out what people need. So you mentioned The Godfather.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I want to see this transition here.
So this is actually something I really, really want to write about this, but I just never have. I think there is an extraordinarily powerful principle here where if you want to be successful in having your own business, whatever kind of a business it is, you kind of need to think like the Godfather in that very first scene of The Godfather. So what you see there is Vito Corleone. It's his daughter's wedding day.
Yep.
And he has all these people coming to him for favors. And
Mm.
he's doling out favors. Okay, he has this guy who needs this guy who needs this. Now, take away all the illegal, immoral stuff. Okay, we're going to set that aside for now. The idea is that he's very, very generous with his help. He's generous with his influence.
Mhm.
And so what it ends up with is that he has all these people who are indebted to him because he's been so generous and helpful. Now, I'm not saying make people indebted to you, but what I am saying is that you have to think of yourself sort of like the Godfather in the sense of always be helping people, always be looking for ways to serve other people and to add value without expecting anything in return. If you do that consistently and you're just making great comments on their posts, you're sharing their stuff, you're leaving reviews for people's books, it adds up over time. It really, really, truly does. It's a very, very simple thing, but it's really, really powerful.
That's so good. And it's so simple and can easily be overlooked, but that is so powerful. Another question. Do you cold email to offer your services?
No, because I think that's an extraordinarily ineffective way to do business. I don't know any stronger way to say that.
I think that's fair. And I was thinking the same thing because it's like it reeks of desperation.
It does, but can I share something?
Yeah,
can I share two things that I think
absolutely.
work way better?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so number one is if you're trying to connect with somebody, a really good way to do that is if they have a podcast or a book, then leave a review for those on Amazon or iTunes or whatever. Take a screenshot and then post that on social media where you know they are. So like if I want to connect with Jim but I don't know Jim, I listen to his podcast or read his book, write a review for that, take a screenshot of that, post it on social media and tell everybody, hey guys, I just listened to this great podcast or read this great book by Jim Woods. It's really, really fantastic. And I tag Jim. Jim's going to notice and he's going to go, oh, that's cool. This person, Kent, I don't know who he is, but he left this review for me. And you're automatically going to have this conversation started with some person that you want to connect with. And that works because it doesn't matter how big somebody gets. They always love it when people review their books or podcasts, especially if you post it on social media, because nobody else goes to the trouble of doing that. You will stand out immediately with those people. Now, the second thing, and this sounds too good to be true, but I'm telling you it works, is if you want to personally connect with somebody, subscribe to their email list, whoever it is, and then read one of their emails and then just reply back to them personally and just say, hey, here's what I learned from this email. I put it into practice and here was the result. Thank you so much for giving me this tip. I've had tons of people respond to me that way. It's crazy effective.
Those are fantastic. And they both show inertia, like not just inertia, but like engagement, active engagement and like real work being put in. I would say some marketers, I'm not remotely saying you or most people, but some might use these tactics in a non-authentic way.
Yeah, you got to be authentic.
You got to be authentic. Exactly.
You can't be fake about it.
Exactly. And fake like shows like you can see it a mile away and it's especially in the review, if it's really, really, really general. Oh, this book was great, 5 stars. And there's like nothing specific at all. Like, if you learn something, share what you learned and it is not fake at all. It's legit. And, I think don't even go into any of this with any expectations of,
Correct.
ooh, I gave your thing a review, now you're gonna like me. No, just be helpful, be kind,
Yep.
share good stories, right? I think kindness really shows and shines through too. So
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jim. That whole thing of kindness and empathy, listening, generosity, those are really, really critical skills in ghostwriting, particularly
mm,
because ghostwriting is partly kind of like therapy in this. And I'm being really serious about that
okay.
because even when I'm talking to somebody who maybe they make a ton of money in their business, like what they're paying me for a book is a drop in the bucket. To me, it represents a lot, but to them, maybe it represents nothing because maybe they're wealthy.
Right. I mean, they're a
Um,
business owner. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So everybody wants the same thing. They all want generosity. They all want to be listened to. So even a person who you might think of as very powerful or even very wealthy, um, they have stresses in their life. Sometimes they have stresses far deeper than what we can see. So
Mhm.
when I'm writing a book for them, they are scared to put that sucker out. Like it's intimidating for somebody who maybe they're a multimillionaire. It's a scary thing for them to put a book out into the world. So part of what I bring to the table is I really work hard on my listening skills and
Mm.
to pick up on the emotional tones of what somebody's talking about, and I try to be very empathetic in my conversation. So those those impulses to really have the right kind of a heart and to love people and really want to serve people, like that's you have to have that impulse. I feel like to be a good ghostwriter. It's not just about the writing. The writing skills are like number 7 on the list of things that are really, really important in being an effective ghostwriter.
I agree completely. And Harley made a comment and said being an authentically active listener is so
Yep.
important.
Oh my gosh, that is such a critical life skill. I could absolutely not agree anymore. I mean, did I say that right? I totally agree with you is what I meant to say.
It's hard not to think of what you're going to say next and to fully 100% listen to someone else. That being said, I
Yep.
think we can all, keep trying, keep learning to improve our story listening skills, not just our storytelling skills, but our
Yep.
our story listening skills. Maybe be okay with a little of that awkward silence.
Well, I think it's really helpful to remember one. So if anybody watching this, if you take nothing else away from this, I hope that you take away this one simple thing. If you can keep in mind that people's number one emotional need is to be affirmed, to be validated. They want to belong, they want to feel loved.
Mhm.
That's what all of us crave from the time that we're newborns to
Yep.
the time that we die. We spend every waking moment craving this need for validation, for affirmation from other people. So if you can give people that, not just in your ghostwriting or in your business, if you can give people that through your books, through your podcasts, through your relationships, man, that is extraordinarily powerful because you're scratching the itch that most people feel every second of every day. Sorry, having some throat problems.
You're fine. You're
Um,
fine. It was so good.
yeah,
That was perfect. I don't even have to set up a conclusion. There it is. Amazing.
yeah.
So good. How can the listeners and viewers and everyone who's enjoying this show, how can they connect with you?
They can connect with me on Facebook. Just search up Kent Sanders. And you can go to my website, which is kentsanders.net. And if you go to kentsanders.net/ghostwriting, that'll take you to my ghostwriting page. There's not much there. It's like just click here to email me. So if anybody's interested in that, I'm happy to chat with them.
Awesome.
And then I also have a podcast called The Daily Writer. If you just search up The Daily Writer with Kent Sanders, that's a daily show where we talk about mindset and habits for success for writers. So that's pretty much it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Kent. This has been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you. My pleasure.
You bet.